Aha. What? But surely. Hello? Hello? Okay. All right, that's working. Bum, 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 bum. All right. Hi, everyone. Oh, today's going to be a fun one because we're going to talk about the anti-technology movements. This is, of course, from chapter 11, the last chapter that we're going to be able to cover. But it's kind of fun. So here we go. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. We're just going to cover the section on Romanticism and the Luddites. So that'll be fun. And slides are a little quote heavy today. Don't worry about taking notes of quotes, but do worry about taking notes of what I'm riffing on, because I'm kind of doing that again today. There's also some arborists outside of my apartment, and they are trimming the trees in the park. So it's not too noisy now. Hopefully it stays that way. Yeah, they've been pruning the trees and chopping up the branches and stuff that they prune. It's kind of interesting, actually. Come on. And of course, my computer is slow today, as usual, so apologies for that. All right. Come on. Ah, there we go. So, there we go. So let's begin. Just kind of starts off this chapter by pointing out that we haven't really encountered too many anti-technology views that far, or so far. Oh my goodness. In the textbook, with the possible exception of we've talked a little bit about feminism and environmentalism, which are not monolithic, right? They're not monolithically anti-technology, but there are some schools of thought in the ecology movements, for example, that are maybe we could describe as anti-technology. But a lot of the schools of thought that we've been learning about are very praising of technology, right? Positivism, of course, from Kant all the way to logical positivism, very embracing of technology, right? Even remember when we talk about Kant and Saint-Simon, they kind of flip-flop back and forth between what they envision technology as being good for. Saint-Simon, I suppose, is the biggest example, where he 1 minute he's sounding like a socialist and another a capitalist, right? Praising of technology, technocracy also, obviously, right? Bacon, some of the more modern thinkers like Veblen, right? Technocrats are like, well, the technical experts should rule, and the reason why is because we live in a society that's full of technology, and we should have the technical experts ruling. Who is the technical expert depends on who you ask, of course. Plato would say a philosopher king who's tutored in philosophy and geometry. Bacon would say, just scientists, natural philosophers. I think Veblen would say engineers, right? Weber might say social scientists, right? So technocracy and orthodox Marxism. So we're talking here like the sort of, I guess the sort of thing that, I'm not sure how orthodox it is, but yeah. Well, let's say orthodox Marxism in air quotes. So we're talking about Soviet systems and stuff like that. But there are, of course, schools of thought critical of technology. I mentioned the ecological movements, which we won't have time to talk about today, but we will get to next time. Excuse me. The big ones that we'll discuss today are Romanticism and Luddism. And we'll talk about Romanticism first. Dusek writes, quote, that Romanticism arose in the late 18th and early 19th centuries with poetry, philosophy, and visual art, and continued through much of the 19th century in music. And a lot of the themes of the Romantic movement have subsequently appeared in later anti-technology movements, particularly neo-Luddism and some strands of environmentalism and the ecology movements, that is to say. I wonder if we can recount some, very briefly, recount some Romantic thinkers. They don't have to just be philosophers. They could be artists or musicians, poets. I wonder if we could recount some, because we only really talk about the forerunner, at least Dusek in this book only really talks about the forerunner to Romanticism, which is arguably Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he spends a bit of time talking about his work. But there was a lot going on in the Romantic period. So I wonder if somebody could name some Romantic thinkers, and we can kind of pick out some of these themes. What are the themes of the Romantics, maybe before we dive into what Dusek has to tell us. So anybody want to go ahead? We need a poet, a philosopher, an artist, or somebody like that from the 18th or 19th century who would today be described as a Romantic. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry I'm yawning so much today, everyone. Very, very sleepy. I wonder if when I ask, like, name a philosopher or an artist from the Romantic period, if people just start doing this. If you do, that's fine. I'm just trying to get some discussion going. Victor Hugo, okay. Lord Byron, okay. I'm not too familiar with either of these. I know that Byron was a poet. I confess that I don't know who Victor Hugo is. Wasn't he an artist? Or was he also a poet? Friedrich Schelling, a philosopher. Okay, nice. So tell me a little bit about what makes them Romantics, right? Because Romanticism is a really interesting. Oh, of course. Hugo's the guy who wrote Les Miserables. Fantastic. Okay, so I guess I do know that work then. Yeah, Les Mis, great musical about the French Revolution, right? And then we got Schelling, Lord Byron. Yeah, I know Lord Byron's a poet. What makes them Romantics, though? What makes thinkers like this Romantics? What are some of the themes of Romanticism? Yeah, I mean, love is the key to growth. I think that's kind of like yeah. Freedom is more of an Enlightenment thing. I mean, yes, it continued on into the Romantic era, but it's really more of an Enlightenment thing. But love is the key to growth. Emotions and the passions are emphasized. Yeah, Abby. Yeah. Feelings are superior to logic. The belief that imagination is superior to reason and devotion to beauty. Yeah. I would say so. Yeah. Thanks, Google. When I think of Romantic philosophers, the one that really jumps out, and I know he's not usually talked about this way, he's usually talked about as a forerunner to existentialism, which is true. But Nietzsche is like such a romantic thinker, especially if you're, especially like take a look at like Beyond Good and Evil or something like that, when he's talking about truth, like stupid truth. Why not rather untruth? After all these philosophers who've claimed to have found the truth, well, I mean, they're just writing an unconscious autobiography, he would have said. So what about musicians? I think of two myself. One is Wagner. Yeah, Vicente. Yeah, I would say absolutely Wagner, because Wagner's music is all very like, very, well, I would say cinematic, because Chopin. Yeah, nice. Very, very like emotional music. Yeah. Nietzsche does talk about Wagner. Nietzsche eventually would have a break with the Wagners, because I think he was like, Wagner was like a very anti-Semitic, very nationalistic, and these are two things that Nietzsche really didn't tolerate. He had initially hoped that Wagner's music could serve as a sort of spark that would ignite like a new sort of like art and music in Europe. And if you think about it, it kind of did. But eventually they would have a break. How did it kind of do that? Well, Wagner's music features ideas like the leitmotif. And this is something that the reason I say his music is cinematic is because his musical scores for his operas and epic performances have influenced movie composers today, right? You would not have John Williams without Wagner, without Richard Wagner. John Williams, by the way, has written some of the most famous movie scores. If you're not familiar, Star Wars, Jaws, E.T., The Extraterrestrial, Jurassic Park, Harry Potter, I think. And it's very cinematic. That cinematic kind of music started with Wagner. So I think that's interesting. And Nietzsche, yeah, he talked about Wagner a lot. Who's the other one? The other major romantic composer that I think of is none other than Beethoven, of course. Beethoven. And the most romantic piece of music, for me anyway, from Beethoven is, of course, his Ninth Symphony, especially the fourth movement. We're talking, the Ode to Joy part. When I listen to that, that's like encapsulates the Romantic movement for me. So a lot of themes. So we've hit upon a couple of themes there. The idea that the passions are superior to reason. Imagination takes a very important role in the Romantic movement. And we'll see Dusek expound upon some of those themes as we make our way through these slides. So let's go to the next one here and see how we're doing for time. So Dusek tells us that how Romanticism arose. He says that Romanticism arose in part as a reaction against the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th century. The pollution, urban poverty, and ugliness of the newly industrialized cities repelled many writers and thinkers. Romanticism was also a reaction against the worship of reason and the denigration of the emotions that was promoted widely by writers of the Age of Reason and Enlightenment eras of the previous century. I want to talk about reason versus the passions, but I think I want to save it for a little later, once we've talked about Rousseau a little bit. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau anticipated the Romantic movement. I think that he is maybe not a romantic himself, but we wouldn't have had Romanticism without Rousseau. Not, at least not as a philosophical, as a philosophy or as a philosophical movement. But for example, in his discourse on the sciences and the arts, he argued that science and technology and even civilization were actually harmful to society and morality. What does that mean? What on earth does he mean there? Civilization is harmful to society? Well, remember that Rousseau is envisioning a sort of primitive society, right? We use this term civilized, right? We still use this term, but what does that even mean, right? I mean, actually, you know, that's interesting that you mentioned that. A form of anarchism. Yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah. I would say basically, yeah, that's the gist of it. So it's got a, we have this, what he's proposing is like a form of anarchism. Anarchism is, of course, you know, anarchos. Without archos is like order. Now, a lot of people have misconceptions about anarchy. We use the word anarchy, you know, like, oh, it's anarchy, like lawlessness or something. But that's not what anarchists really are about. Proper anarchists are like interested in fighting against unjust laws, unjust authority figures. That's what anarchists are about, really. Now, I say that civilization itself may be harmful to society is because, well, the reason I say that is because Rousseau is envisioning a sort of primitive society, right? Maybe like an idyllic hunter-gatherer sort of situation. The way we lived when we lived in harmony with nature, he imagined. You know, I think I've mentioned this before, but Rousseau is very much the anti-Hobbes, right? They're both very much about a sort of social contract, right? I think we can both call them contractarians when it comes to their political philosophy. But Hobbes looked at nature as this terrible place that wants to kill you. The state of nature is not a fun place. It's a place where anyone can just come and kill you and take all your stuff, right? He said life in the state of nature was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Rousseau is the opposite of this. He's like, no, man. The state of nature, life would have been idyllic. Civilization, why do we need civilization? Like, what is civilization? Is civilization even a good thing? What does it mean when we say somebody is civilized? It's like, well, we live in cities, we live in organized communities, but is that good for us? Are we living according to our nature? Right? That's what Rousseau is saying here. Science and technology, and maybe even civilization, are contrary to our nature. They're bad for us. And in his educational treatise Emile, he argued that formal education actually suppressed creativity. He said, formal education will kind of mess with the curiosity that children naturally have. And he even went so far as to argue that we shouldn't teach children to read until adolescence. Like, let's not bother. let's just take them out into nature, and you know, we can talk to them. We can still pass knowledge down, but let's just let them be kids and play around and be creative, right? And I think there might actually be something to that. Not the not being taught to read thing, but the worry that education in this time and place absolutely probably would have seemed very stifling, and might have suppressed the creativity and curiosity of kids. Dusek continues. Oh, sorry, everyone. Dusek continues, and he writes that his notion of the noble savage, quote, a pre-civilized person, superior in spirit and personality to the alienated products of civilization, also influenced much later anthropology and cultural history. So the noble savage, I mean, I guess nowadays savage refers to, it's a pejorative term against somebody who is, you know, seen as not civilized, right? But in French, it comes from the French sauvage, which just means like wild, right? So that's what he means by pre-civilized, living not in an artificial community like a city, but in harmony with nature, as a sort of wild person, like a hunter today, what we would call a hunter-gatherer, probably. And he thought these people were morally superior. You know, they were just better people, living better lives, right? So let's see what I got on the next slide. How are we doing for time? I'm not bad. Rousseau was quite influential. I liked this little anecdote that that Dusek left for us. He mentions Immanuel Kant, who was a contemporary of Rousseau, and Kant lived in Prussia, and in a place called Königsberg, which means King's Mountain. It's one of the only German place names I know that I can translate properly, but King's Mountain, Königsberg. Now, Kant was an interesting fella. He's said to have kept a very rigid schedule, so rigid that you could set your watch by his daily walks. It was said that he would swaddle himself. You know how you swaddle babies? You know, you wrap them up tightly and, you know, hang them up somewhere. Babies like it. They feel like comfy, you know. Kant would swaddle himself in bed every night to go to sleep. It's often said that he never traveled more than 10 miles outside of Königsberg, but this is actually not true. Kant actually had traveled. It's not like he never got out and saw the world. You know, that's actually not true. But it does say something about how we think of Kant. So Kant's an interesting guy. Kind of strange in some ways. So he's walking, and people can set their watch by his schedule, except for 2 times he misses his walk. One time is when the news of the French Revolution arrived, and another time was when one of Rousseau's books arrived in the post, because you know, people were reading him. It was all the rage. Even Kant was like, "Oh my goodness, I can't go for a walk today. I need to read Rousseau," right? Which is funny when I think of Kant. I imagine Kant being torn between taking his daily walk and reading a book that arrived in the mail. It's funny just to imagine. What do I do? Anyway, another little anecdote from Dusek on page 177. One noblewoman dressing for a ball happened to pick up a copy that had arrived. She bid her coachman wait a minute while she read a bit, asked him to wait longer, and finally made him wait all night, never arriving at the ball. So yeah, I guess quite the writer. So this is kind of what I was getting at earlier with examples of Enlightenment thinkers, Enlightenment artists. Oh my god. Oh my goodness, I'm so sleepy. I'm sorry I'm yawning so much, everyone. Did not get very much sleep. I was up late doing work, which, yeah, ugh. I'm so glad the semester's almost over. But this is what I was trying to get at earlier, with the naming of certain thinkers, poets, artists, and so forth. In the scientific revolution, which was kind of, that was an Enlightenment thing. That was happening during the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution begins with Copernicus and his publication of the heliocentric theory of the solar system, and it's agreed to have ended with Newton's publication of Principia Mathematica. So that covers a period of like 200 years or so, I think, if I've got my dates right. And of course, reason is championed here. This is also the age of rationalism, right? Descartes was a part of the scientific revolution, a rationalist philosopher, and even empiricist philosophers who thought that ultimately knowledge comes from the senses were still rational in the sense that they championed reason, right? But Romanticism emphasizes the passions. Nowadays, we call those the emotions, and attributed a lot of importance to imagination. And it's sometimes, even today, we have this idea that the emotions and reason are at odds, or that imagination is inferior to inferior to logic or something, right? But is that really true? I, for one, don't believe it is, and I will explain why in a moment. But I want to hear from some of you. I want to hear whether you feel that see what I did there, whether you feel that the emotions and reason are at odds or not. What do we think? Should we be like Mr. Spock from Star Trek and just be like, logical all the time? Right? That is not logical, Captain. Mr. Spock, by the way, from Star Trek is a Vulcan. And Vulcans suppress their emotions and they emphasize logic. So Stefan says, I believe that emotions can influence the extent we reason, but can subsequently complement it nicely. Yeah, that's a nice example. If you're trying to reason something out when you're in a good mood versus in a bad mood, your reasoning may be affected by that. That is true. They do have an impact on one another. Like if you are trying to think through a problem, like an important problem, you probably want to make sure you're in the right headspace, right? You don't want to be like angry or something or disgusted when you're trying to solve a philosophical problem. And likewise, if you're very emotional, if maybe you're having an emotional outburst, you maybe want to tell yourself to calm down. You might say, be reasonable to yourself, for example. Vicente says, Vicente says, even biologically, they are intertwined. I don't think they can be separated from each other. Yeah, I agree. Basically, yeah. And I will come back to that in a moment. Reason always needs a starting point. I don't know if we would have reason without it initially feeling right, like a gut feeling, right? Yeah. So here's what I think. I think that the reason versus emotion dichotomy is kind of bullshit. The reason I say that is because, and this is kind of getting back to what Vicente said, biologically they're intertwined. Well, we've evolved emotions for a reason, right? And maybe this is some Enlightenment thinkers, this is pre-Darwin. There were Enlightenment thinkers who were aware of the idea of evolution. Darwin's ancestor, Erasmus Darwin, toyed with the idea. Ancient Greek thinkers had flirted with the idea that life forms slowly changed over time. It's just that no one had a mechanism to explain it. Darwin came along and did it with natural selection. but people had kind of known about the idea for a while. Now, one thing they didn't know, though, was that emotions probably evolved to save cognitive resources, right? Why is that? Well, emotions indicate that something important is happening. Emotions have a sort of job to do, right? Think of an emotion like fear. What does fear do for us in a sort of evolutionary survival context? Well, it tells us that there's something dangerous happening, and it motivates us to get away from the danger, to fight or to run away, right? So that's fear. Anger. Anger means that if you're angry, it's probably because somebody has slighted you or committed an injustice against you, or an offense, or they've hurt you. So anger can be a moral emotion to try and you want to get rid of the anger. So you want to address the problem. You want to get justice, right? Then you won't be angry anymore if you get your just desserts. So emotions, if you talk to somebody like Jesse Prince, a philosopher who has a very interesting book on the emotions called Gut Reactions, he would tell you that emotions are like embodied judgments. They're embodied in the sense that they're a judgment that doesn't just happen in the head. It happens throughout the whole body, which is interesting. It kind of fits in with the whole embodied cognition, extended mind sort of stuff, which is really cool. Another thinker is Richard Lazarus, who was a psychologist who wrote a book called Emotion and Adaptation, a very, very long book. But this is what he argues, essentially that emotions represent certain correlational themes between the person experiencing them and their environment and what's going on in it. And each emotion tells us something different about what's happening. Antonio Damasio, another one, a neuroscientist, has a very cool book called Descartes' Error, where he makes a very similar argument, drawing from neuroscientific sources, that emotions do not make us less rational. Emotions are for reasoning about the kinds of things our evolutionary ancestors would have had to reason about to survive. But, it's like the old example I always like to use. If you're out there hunting and gathering and you hear a twig snap in the forest, you feel afraid and startled. You've evolved to feel this way. And it's better to be afraid and run away, even if it's just the wind. Because if it's not the wind and it's a predator, and you think to yourself, it's just the wind, well, you might get eaten. And you're not going to pass on your genes if you've been eaten. So this is the kind of job emotions evolved for, evolutionarily speaking. So I don't think that they are at odds. They don't have to be. I don't know. Does anyone say otherwise? I mean, I did say that they don't have to be at odds, which is not to say that they aren't ever at odds. Sometimes I have a problem I need to solve and I get maybe frustrated and I need to take a break, right? Like maybe I'm playing chess or something. Like maybe I'm doing some chess puzzles and I keep getting them wrong. And I'm getting frustrated, the more frustrated I get, the worse I get at them, because I'm not thinking clearly, and then I need to take a break and come back later once I've calmed down, right? So they can be at odds. Need they always be at odds? Absolutely not. No, I think fundamentally emotions are actually good tools to help us reason, especially about significant events that are happening to us, and also about our values. Emotions help us They're like a form of reasoning about what we value. And if you're curious to learn more about that, you should check out some of my philosophy of emotion lectures, where I use Julian Diona and Fabrice Tironi's book on the emotions, which is very good. Right? Yeah. Yeah. See, emotions motivate. Although hunger's not an emotion. I guess we could say, actually, I don't know if gluttony would be an emotion either. I mean, not all bodily feelings are emotions, like pain. Pain is not an emotion. Hunger is not an emotion. Being sleepy isn't an emotion, right? But this is true. Maybe you are feeling bad. Maybe you're beating up on yourself, right? Maybe you're body shaming yourself. Oh, I'm hungry and there's pizza in the fridge. Guess I'll eat it. Right? Well, I mean, again, what's the emotion though? Like you smell the pizza and you form a desire for pizza. Temptation? I don't know. I don't know if temptation is an emotion. Because emotions need to have more than just bodily feelings. They need to have action tendencies, and they need to be about something, right? They need to have content. Lack of serotonin. I mean, we could just say that you believe that eating the pizza will make you happy in the moment. So maybe you're not experiencing an emotion until you eat the pizza, until your desire for pizza is satisfied. But you might think to yourself, oh boy, I'd be really happy if I ate that pizza. So you go eat it. But maybe you'd also be happy if you went out for a run and ran for 20 minutes, which maybe you haven't done. Maybe you've only run for 15 minutes at a time. So you go and you do 20-minute run and you're like, oh, I did it. I've earned that pizza, right? So yeah, I guess it could work like that. Yeah, okay. So I don't think that they have to be at odds. They sometimes can be, but they definitely ought not to be. All right, let's move on. I want to get through the Romanticism stuff. Here's a quote from page 178, which I'll read to you from Dusek. Romanticism also questioned the view of the world that the philosophers of early modern science had presented. Science, particularly physics, was successful in describing the world in terms of mathematics, of quantity. In addition, physics explained the world in terms of atoms, entities unobservable in direct perception. Physics was described in terms of mass, length, and time, not of other qualities. For instance, experienced colors, sounds, smells, tastes, the so-called secondary qualities, were explained in terms of the spatial primary qualities. Secondary qualities were considered a subjective product of our sense organs and mind, and not as real or fundamental as the primary qualities. So if you've read, there are primary qualities that exist out there in the world, things like solidity, mass, right? Physical qualities. Those are primary qualities, but secondary qualities exist in the mind. So the color of a rose, the redness of a rose, that redness is in the mind. So it's a secondary quality. The Romantics disagreed with all of this. They thought that what's like really real is what we can directly perceive. All those so-called secondary qualities would, for a Romantic, be the primary qualities, right? So the Romantics think that the denigration of direct sense experience and the elevation by science of more objective forms of knowledge as the sort of ultimate reality, like the elevation of mathematics, number and quantity to ultimate reality, was ultimately what was responsible for all the dirty, polluted cities, the Industrial Revolution, the lack of concern for nature, because we are we're getting out of touch with the natural world when we do that. Let's go on to the next slide. Oh my goodness, excuse me. To continue, one feature of much romantic thought that has been taken up by ecological critics of contemporary science and technology is holism. Holism is the claim that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. That is, the whole system has qualities and characteristics that are not those of its parts. Nature would be one of these systems. The Romantics would say. If you want to learn more about different kinds of holism, you can read about it in box 11.1. So you can see that the Romantics were very skeptical of the sort of atomistic approach of natural philosophy at the time. They thought of the sciences as just too analytical and not in touch with intuition and imagination. Not sufficiently in touch with those sorts of things anyway. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that the Romantics outright rejected science or reason. They certainly didn't, not at all. But they thought that we needed a better approach than the sort of atomistic, mechanistic natural philosophy that had dominated throughout the scientific revolution. Right. Some romantic thinkers emphasized what we could call a dynamical approach. And the dynamical approach to science would emphasize forces over just matter in motion. In mechanistic philosophy, it's all just matter in motion, which is part of the story. But there's not really until Newton comes along much about force. So they wanted a dynamical and intuitive approach to understanding nature, and maybe they influenced thinkers with this dynamical approach. I mean, after all, Michael Faraday, the famous scientist who did a lot of experimenting and public demonstrations of science with electricity, was influenced by this idea of forces, using ideas like electric force and magnetic force to explain how electricity worked. He didn't know the math, or rather he couldn't do the math, but thanks to his ideas about electricity, James Clerk Maxwell was able to come along and actually show us that electricity and magnetism are two sides of the same coin. Gave us the mathematics to explain the electromagnetic forces in the late 19th century, and this is quite new. And maybe Dusek says this is thanks to this dynamical approach that was emphasized by Romantic thinkers. Oh, yeah, okay, that's the quote from Dusek. I thought I had not put this on my slides, but there it is. Dusek says some historians of science have suggested that the field approach to physics of Ørsted and Faraday, as well as the notion of conservation of energy, owed part or all of its formulation to Romantic conceptions of nature as unified. What do I mean when I say that they want a more intuitive approach? Well, intuitive in the sense that ordinary perception can allow us to grasp nature, like how an artist can paint a beautiful landscape using her ordinary perception, right? That's what they mean by intuitive. Oh my god! Oh, no more late nights. No more late nights, Josh. Wow. Of course, the Romantic thinkers also valued nature over civilization. So Dusek writes, the Romantics saw the Industrial Revolution and the new technology as destroying both nature and the human spirit. The belching smokestacks and polluted streams and rivers of the industrial centers destroyed nature, while the crowded, unhealthy living conditions, the repetitive work, the poverty of the workers, and the greedy pursuit of wealth by the owners destroyed human character. Technology itself, the steam engine, the railroad, the mill, was frequently seen as the culprit, which is why Romantic thinkers also think of nature itself as a source of wisdom and inspiration. Now, I think we're nearly at Luddism. Almost, yeah. We're almost there. Has anyone seen, or maybe even better, maybe you've been there. I haven't, but has anyone seen films or videos about cities like, for example, Singapore? Singapore is really neat. I would love to go there one day and visit. But in Singapore, they have a lot of new architecture that integrates nature into the city. We're talking about sky rises with trees planted all the way up, right? Ways of integrating the city with nature. I think the Romantics would be very impressed with this kind of urban planning, as opposed to just factories spewing out smoke from the coal that fuels their steam engines. So that might be something you want to check out if you're not familiar. I think actually in one of the BBC documentaries, Our Planet, maybe, there's an episode on cities that talks a lot about Singapore as an example of what we can do to make it so that our cities are more harmonious with nature. Well, I mean, the thing is that they kind of have to do this. I mean, it's an island, like it's a city state. If they could not do this, but it would definitely not be as nice of a place to live, considering the population density. So I agree. I rather like Toronto as an example of something that's a bit more spread out, but which incorporates a lot of green space. Ottawa too, but I mentioned Toronto just because when we think of a big giant city, I mean Toronto's the biggest in Canada. So Toronto, I think, does a good job in spite of all the concrete of having a lot of green spaces. And a lot of trees, big parks in Toronto. So that's nice. But Singapore is cool because of the architecture. What else do the Romantics have to say? Well, Dusek writes that later back to nature movements, such as the arts and crafts movement of the 19th century Britain, the German youth movement of the early 20th century, the counterculture of the 1960s and after, and the ecology movement of the past few decades, or the New Age movement, share Romanticism's praise of wild nature, criticisms of artificiality, and distrust of technology. William Morris's late 19th century arts and crafts movement rejected the uniformity and lack of imagination of mass-produced objects and emphasized a return to handicraft. The German youth movement combined outdoor hiking and camping with a disdain for the lifeless abstractions of physics and technology. Heisenberg was a follower of the youth movement, by the way. Werner Heisenberg, of the physicist of uncertainty principle fame. But this is really interesting to me because still with us. You can still go to the arts and crafts store and make your own stuff, decorations, art. This comes from this. In the 19th century Britain as a sort of reaction against the Industrial Revolution and everything being made all the same, mass produced. The German youth movement is interesting because it's very indicative of the sort of return to nature. Like, let's get back to nature. Let's get out there and hike. Let's go hiking. Let's go camping. Let's get into nature. The Nazis took this up. I mean, they didn't come up with this, but the Nazis were also kind of romantic in how they thought of nature, right? There was a lot of like, let's get back to nature. I mean, that's what the Hitler Youth was initially about. You know, like Boy Scouts for Nazis. What else? What else? Well, just getting out and, you know, exercise, being in nature. And they tied that all together with the whole blood and soil thing. You know what I mean? Stefan says, this entire lecture reminds me of the failure of the Luddites as an example. It seems technology, by and large, continues to progress even at the expense of nature. It seems to. And does that imply technological determinism? It seems to. I don't know. But you're right. You have a point there. And I think that, yeah, the Luddites. Well, let's talk about the Luddites because they're next. But yeah, the Luddites were anti-technology. But of course, we still have technology. So whatever happened to those Luddites? Well, let's talk about them. We still have about 20, 25 minutes left. But I only have 3 more slides. So we'll just briefly cover the section on Luddites. Luddite is a term that nowadays we use to disparage anti-technology people. But who are the original Luddites? Well, Dusek tells us the original Luddites were weavers and other textile workers in Britain at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th centuries, whose home handiwork was being made obsolete by mechanized looms and weaving factories. The Luddites smashed the factory machinery in protest at and opposition to the new factory system. They claimed to be followers of General Ned Ludd as a leader of the movement, who may have really existed or maybe a mythical figure. Numerous letters and manifestos by different individuals and groups were issued in the name of General Ludd or King Ludd. The original Luddites apparently were acting primarily from economic motives. They were being put out of work by the lowering of prices for cloth. They were being forced from their traditional craft-based homework into the factory system, subjected to poor discipline, or subjected to labor discipline and making less money in the process. So the original Luddites were kind of getting the short end of the stick as industrialism was really taking off. Now, somebody who could have worked from home and made a living was having their job reallocated to a factory, and they had no choice because the factory could outproduce home textile workers and people who weaved at home. The factory can produce so much that there's such a great supply that prices drop. So now you can't support yourself by selling your own textiles from home. You've got to go work as a wage laborer at a factory, and working conditions in these factories were not great. I mean, these were sweatshops. And yes, adults and children worked in them. So not very cool. I think maybe I would have been a Luddite back in the day. Maybe I would have been going in and perhaps smashing those machines in protest because it's my livelihood that's on the line. So I don't know, maybe, who knows? Nowadays, the usage of this term is a bit misleading, right? We call anti-technology people Luddites now, but they're not really concerned with what the original Luddites were concerned with. The original Luddites were concerned with impoverishment and job loss. Nowadays, anti-technologists are concerned with what Dusek calls lifestyle issues. And I'm not talking about lifestyle issues like, you know, like lifestyle magazines or TV shows. We don't mean it in the vernacular sense, but rather how we live. Do we live close to nature? Do we embrace technology, right? How are we living? That's what most modern day anti-technologists or neo-Luddites are about. Can we think of any modern day anti-technologists? Or even not anti-technologists, but somebody who perhaps could be described as a neo-Luddite in that they're not concerned with impoverishment or job loss, but with how we live. I was hoping somebody would mention the Unabomber. Yeah, Ted Krasinski. Ted Krasinski was a pretty smart guy, actually. He went to Harvard. Yeah, and I believe he was a mathematician. And he grew to believe that the way we live our lives, dependent on technology, out of touch with nature, was untenable. He went and lived in a cabin in the woods, and eventually started sending bombs in the mail to people. He's called the Unabomber, I believe, because one of these bombs, he targeted a United Airlines flight with one of his bombs. So United Airlines, Unabomber. Yeah, definitely a modern day Luddite. But like, definitely in the sense that he was not really concerned with impoverishment, but how we are living. And I find it really curious that Dusek doesn't mention the Unabomber. It's really weird. I had a philosophy of technology, kind of a philosophy of technology seminar in undergrad. Actually, it was really more about transhumanism and posthumanism. We talked about the Unabomber all the time. So any other examples? Perhaps maybe less violent examples, right? Not that it's good that you brought this up, Jonah. But what are some other examples? People who are not concerned with job loss, but with how we're living. The Amish, maybe. I mean, the Amish are a group of people, religious folks, who belong under this sort of Anabaptist umbrella. So you've got the Amish, you have the Mennonites, and there's another group whose name I can't recall, but they're all similar, living simply, lifestyle issues. Yeah, I would say so. And like I said, like I've said this previously, in Northern Ontario, where I grew up out in the country, sort of between North Bay and Sudbury. So if you know where that is, it's kind of along Highway 17, a lot of farms. And around there's quite a big Mennonite community. And they absolutely do not eschew technology. They have very nice technology, in fact. Good farm equipment, really good farm equipment. It's just that they kind of operate as a sort of collective, and they share it. And they try to do things like sustainable farming. So yeah, I suppose you could say that some Anabaptists are like that. Krishnamurti, I don't know about the Krishnamurti. They sound like some kind of ascetic, like ascetic people, like monks or something. Is that what they are? I'm not sure. My friend who bought a BlackBerry on Facebook Marketplace. Yeah. Your friend might be a neo-Luddite. But yeah, these are good examples. Here, thanks, Julian. Jiddu Krishnamurti. Oh, it's a person. I thought it was an organization. What, Krishnamurti? I guess I was thinking Hare Krishna or something like that. Okay. I don't know this thinker, but now that I know, I will have to go and look. I'll have to go and look him up. No, he died the year I was born. Wow. Holy moly. Wow, he was like 91. Oh, one of the main guys behind Theosophy for Jonah. Nice. Yeah, I'll have to check him out then. Yeah. Awesome. Well, those are some good examples. My example, David Suzuki. When I think of like a neo-Luddite, somebody who's not directly concerned with economics or jobs, but with how we live, but who doesn't necessarily reject technology, I think of David Suzuki, right? The Nature of Things. Nature of Things is still on, and the CBC puts them on their YouTube channel on CBC Docs, so you can go and watch The Nature of Things for free, like whenever you want, and it's just great. There's some really good stuff. Let's see. Now, the thing about neo-Luddite philosophers is that they're not really like the old Luddites. And we can see this here. We're talking about how they're preoccupied with these lifestyle issues, right? Neo-Luddites are probably more like Romantic philosophers rather than like the OG Luddites. One example would be, and I'm probably butchering this name, Chellis Glendinning. Now, this sounds like I don't know her background, but I think this is an Irish or a Welsh name, and I cannot. I'm bad at pronouncing, so I'm sorry if I'm getting this wrong. But she's a psychologist who, quote, issued a neo-Luddite manifesto. Glendinning, Glendinning. Oh, maybe she's Scottish. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, I'm bad at pronouncing names, and I apologize. Glendinning is not solely concerned with lifestyle issues, but sees contemporary technology as a genuine threat to life and health. She has previously researched people who had suffered from various nuclear and chemical technologies, such as pesticides and medicines that have produced cancer and pain. As a psychologist, Glendinning compares our social addiction to technology to drug and alcohol addiction, considering the writers of techno-hype as enablers. Yeah, right? Like, right? You ever get sucked down the rabbit hole while you're on your phone? You know, you're like, oh, I'm just going to check TikTok. Just 2 minutes, check TikTok. I don't have TikTok because, number one, I'm too old, and number two, it's such a time suck. Because sometimes even I get sucked in when my partner's watching. She's got her phone and shows me a thing on TikTok. Look at this. This is funny. Haha, we laugh about it. And then I sit and I look, and before I know it, like 20 minutes are passed. It's nuts. You know, and social media apps, video games, they're designed to be addictive nowadays. They're designed, their aesthetics, their functionality is designed to give you that little dopamine hit so that you keep coming back. You know, oh, look how many likes I got. Dopamine. Oh, I beat this level in my game. Dopamine. And you keep coming back to it because it kind of hijacks that pleasure reward system. So she's not wrong. She's not wrong about this. This tech, especially the smart technology that's emerged, you know, since, like, she's writing this in the 90s. But what she writes describes a lot of this technology very well. You know, I'm actually not sure. I would have to read her Neo-Luddite manifesto, but I would say that just on the face of it, I would say that she would probably be supportive of it, because one of the bad forms of technology would be like nuclear and chemical technologies, right? So one would think that solar panels would make a nice green alternative to that. But I'm not sure. I would have to read the thing, read her manifesto. But if she were writing this today, I think she would talk a lot about social media and things like that. You know, Mark Zuckerberg is like our enabler. Let's see now. I think this is the last slide for today. Just to continue that quote, which comes from pages 182 and 183. Glendinning, like most other critics of contemporary technology, does not demand the elimination of all technology, but wants a development of different technologies more amenable to human well-being and political democracy than present technologies. Social scientists talk of technological choices versus social ends, claiming that the choices for technology development are made with an eye toward profit rather than with an eye toward improving society. Yeah, okay. So I guess to come back to that solar panel question, she would absolutely say, yes, this is the kind of thing we need to be doing, rather than nuclear power or you know, chemical technology. I don't know if I'm sold on the whole nuclear energy bad idea, though. I really don't know if I'm sold on that. I think that there is a very good argument to be made for trying to develop smaller reactors that produce less hazardous waste. Nowadays, plutonium is a big byproduct of nuclear reactors, and plutonium's terrible for the environment. I mean, it's got like a half-life of like 80,000 years or something. And it can be used to make nuclear weapons. But there are smaller reactors we could make, like thorium reactors, which would transmute the waste into much less harmful stuff with half-life of a few hundred to 1,000 years, which is much safer. Because really, with nuclear technology, other than an accident and the release of radiation in the operation of the plant, the big risk is that someday down the line, the waste will get out and contaminate something too. A major drawback of nuclear energy is that it requires extensive government support, since it's so expensive to build and maintain. But that's more of an economic argument. I guess we could say that if regulations were lessened, it could lead to consequence. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chernobyl, right? Chernobyl was indicative of, I think, some of the failures of Soviet bureaucracy and the Soviet economy. The Chernobyl plant was in Ukraine, but at the time, Ukraine was a Soviet country, and Chernobyl happened, and people didn't even realize at first the extent of the radiation that was leaking, because they didn't have the right Geiger counters, the things that measure radiation. They said the radiation is only like 3 rads or something. Well, it's like, no, man, it's just that's how high your Geiger counter goes. the radiation's way higher than that. Also, poor oversight, all kinds of things. Not that this should be your source of information on this, but the HBO miniseries on Chernobyl is actually pretty good. It's pretty good. I wouldn't take it as like a historical document or anything, but it's a very good dramatization of what happened. If you want to check that out. But yeah, nuclear technology, I'm kind of split on. Solar's great. We need to keep going. Wind is good. Let's keep building windmills. But nuclear technology is at least right now more reliable than those. And I think if we build better nuclear plants, safer nuclear plants, I think it would be good. But the problem is, what do we do with the waste, right? What do we do with the waste? That's always the problem. Anyway, what do we think about neo-Luddism? I mean, we've already identified some romantics. We've talked about some neo-Luddites, but I wonder how we feel in this class. We've got about 10 more minutes where we can kind of hash out whether any of us might be romantics or Luddites or neo-Luddites. I'm sure we don't have any Luddites. We don't have any textile workers going to factories and smashing machines. Okay. But we might have some neo-Luddites or romantic thinkers. What do we think? I'll go first. I'll say that I think of myself as quite sympathetic to Romanticism. I think that absolutely we should try and learn from nature and live in harmony with nature. I suppose my dream is to have a hobby farm. Yeah, one day I'd like to have a hobby farm, and I'll grow some fruits and vegetables and raise some animals. And I want to do it in a way that's like harmonious, it's just like a fantasy I have. Maybe that's how I'll retire. I don't know. But I'd set my farm up in a way that everything works together. And, these, I got the compost, and then I get the chickens that eat the compost and eat the bugs, and they poop everywhere. And that's my fertilizer. And I've got a whole plan just to have a farm one day. So Stefan says he's opposed to the romantics and viewpoints, but you sympathize. That's interesting. Why are you opposed, and what do you sympathize with? I'd like to know. That's interesting. And Jonah says, I'm not a Luddite, but I would likely support them should they prop up somewhere near me. Yeah, I mean, again, I think this Luddite, we use it in a way that it doesn't really work anymore, right? We say like, you're a Luddite, you're anti-technology, but no, they're not anti-technology. They're more like romantics in the sense that the romantics didn't outright reject science and technology either, just that we weren't using it properly, right? We were using it to dominate nature when instead we need to work in harmony with nature and learn from nature, right? Just think of factory farming versus like sustainable farming. That's an example. Vicente says, I'm captivated by the social ends and technological means idea in a collective sense. We'll look more into it. Personally, I'm also into the being self-sufficient in a farm. Yeah. And I think maybe that has something to do with how I grew up. I mean, I didn't live on a farm, but we had chickens and ducks and turkeys and my sister now to this day has a farm like this too, where she rescues animals that people don't want. So she's got a bunch of chickens, pigs. She doesn't eat them. They're not for food. They're just there being cared for. Horses, even some foxes that were saved from a fur farm. So that's cool. She's got like a rescue farm, but I want a little hobby farm where I can, I don't know, grow a giant pumpkin or something, right? Like, why not? I mean, that just sounds cool. So Steven is clarifying, I can agree with their desire to support nature, though I believe they were fundamentally discrediting the immense potential technology has if used properly. For example, the better technology gets, the less land we might need, since we could optimize. As a result, we would better support the environment. Yeah. I guess the counterpoint would be like, technology seldom works out that way, though. When we get technology that's more efficient, we don't use it to use fewer resources. We almost never do that. Instead, we use that efficiency to get more resources, right? Like, think about fuel efficiency in a car. This is one fun example. Like, cars have gotten more fuel efficient. The engines have gotten more fuel efficient. But gasoline powered cars still pollute a lot. Why? Because, well, maybe the engine consumes less fuel, but we're adding more and more features to vehicles. Air conditioning, power everything, power windows, power sunroof, onboard computers, DVD players, which makes the car heavier, which means it's guzzling just as much gas, right? Maybe it depends what you think. Like, are we in control of technology or are we not? I guess it depends if you're a determinist or not, right? It's possible that it's a bureaucratic failure, and maybe we need people to step up and say, look, the car needs to be more efficient. It can't pollute as much. So no extra bells and whistles, right? But the customer wants a car with bells and whistles. So I don't know. I think this might be an instance of technological determinism here. I'm not sure. But I don't know. I would say that I definitely have some romantic tendencies. I definitely think that, I like what you get in Eastern philosophy, where life, the world, is such a big, complicated system, and we're a part of it. We're a part of the natural world. We think we're separate from nature. We're not. We're a part of the natural world. So if we look at how the natural world works and how it strikes a balance, that's what I really like. I probably sound like some kind of hippie or something right now, but no, I think that nature does actually have a lot to teach us. Speaking of nature, I can hear them. They must be back from lunch. They're back to pruning the trees in the park. So with that, why don't we end it for today? Good class, everyone. That was fun. Good discussion too. Next time we'll start talking about ecology movements. So that's what we'll do on Thursday's lecture. I know I have another slide here where I wrote some important stuff down. Let me see. Yes, we'll continue. We're going to look at ecology movements. And by the way, keep your eyes on Brightspace throughout the day. Later on today, I'll be releasing the grades for the second critical response. Again, I'm so sorry this took so long. Honestly, I think I might have been getting a little depressed over the past little while, and I've only just realized it. I was like, why am I so unproductive? And then I had like a good day where I felt really good. And I was like, oh, I said to myself, oh, I must have been feeling a little depressed before. So anyway, not trying to make excuses, but I think that's what happened. But I'm almost done. I've got like just a couple more. I'm going to do those later today, and then I'll release them. So you'll all have some feedback before you have to hand in your final critical response. So anyway, that's all for today. Take care, everyone, and I will see you on Thursday for our lecture on more of the anti-technology movements. Yeah, Stefan, go ahead. What's your question? Yes, I know that. No, that's not unreasonable at all. I want to get it done as soon as possible. I will be starting on them very soon. Liam has also been quite busy with his thesis commitments, so we are just kind of getting to them now, but we should be able to have them graded, I'm hoping, by the middle of next week is what I would like to aim for. So that's what I'm going for. Yeah, I'm sorry. It really has been a heck of a go. And I'm not trying to make excuses. But yeah, I think everybody is feeling the craziness coming off the Omicron wave. Then we had the truckers, the international situation, everybody's got stuff going on in their personal lives. Yeah, exactly. Oh, Doug Ford, take your masks off, everybody. This is terrible. I hope everybody really continues to wear their mask. I'm wearing my mask when I go to the grocery store or wherever I go. I'm still wearing my mask because we're not out of this. And B1A or B2A or whichever variant, yeah, we're starting to see an uptick in the hospitalizations. So be careful out there, everybody. Be safe. Wear your mask. Wash your hands. If you're not vaccinated, get that vax. I got 3 of them, so I'm feeling good, but I still don't want to get sick. So anyway, yeah, I'll have more grades for you soon, and then I'm going to get right to work on the proposals, get those done as soon as I can. So thank you, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.